Joining me now, Vivek Ramaswamy, the author of Woke Incorporated. Vivek, always a pleasure to see you. I think that their protestations kind of reveal that they really don't like freedom of speech because their own ideology is built of balsa wood.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it. And in fact, the left used to actually be the side of the political spectrum that favored free speech. How tables have turned. Dagan, taking over a company is no easy task. I think that many of Twitter's own employees do not believe in Elon's new mission for the company. And so I think he's going to have his hands full right out of the gate. My view would be, yes, there are a lot of employees who might appear to do useful work today, but who aren't mission aligned. Pay them to leave. Get them out of the company. Get the allegedly independent fact checkers whose impulse it is to engage in viewpoint-based discrimination. Get them out and pay them to leave. And if you want to know how to generate the money to do that, I would say also take a bunch of the people who've been working from home, not showing up for the office, not doing very much work. Fire them. Use those proceeds to pay the other ones who are mission unaligned to leave. And then you have the core group who I think is actually going to take the company forward.
Shouldn't their motivation be just turning the company into a profitable enterprise and growing it as much as possible? Shouldn't that actually be the motivation for a platform like this?
It should be, but we're not starting from ground zero and neutral territory here. We're starting from a deep history of the last 14 years. And even Elon has said that his own motivations as an owner are not purely or even closely related to profits at all, but driven by wanting to see Twitter become a free speech platform. So I don't think that first principles view, which I would have adopted, that's not a realistic starting point here. Everyone has a mission and an agenda. The question is whose mission and agenda wins. I hope it's Elon's free speech agenda. And I actually do think that'll make the company more commercially successful.
Here's one thing, Elon, I'll call him Elon as if I know him. I've only tried to interview him once, and he walked off the interview because he was going to see his investment bankers. So this was years and years ago. He said, I hope that even my worst critics remain on Twitter because that is what free speech means. Do you think that's a possibility for all the people who are, all the lefties? I call them the thin-skinned, sanctimonious professional snivellers on Twitter. I think it's the same thing that you heard about I'm moving to Canada if Trump's elected. They're not going anywhere because they like being heard, and they're egomaniacal enough that they can't not be on Twitter.
And many of them already have followings enough that makes it costly to now go somewhere else. But of course, free speech doesn't mean just seeing speech you agree with. It means most of all protecting the speech that you disagree with. Now, here's the thing, actually, is that we have to distinguish between different kinds of free speech problems. What's been happening is these big tech companies have been smuggling in viewpoint-based discrimination by calling it other things, like content moderation for misinformation or truly false speech. That's a whole separate kettle of fish that we could talk about. But actually what Elon's going to, I would urge him to smoke out, is to say that we need to define these categories separately. False speech is one thing, commercial spam is a different thing, pornography is a different thing, incitement to violence is a different thing. But when you get to expressing your opinions, in America, there's no such thing as a false opinion. There are false facts, and the burden of proof has to be on the side that says the fact is false to prove it. But there is no such thing in constitutional law as in real life as a false opinion. And I think that should be the North Star around which this new platform is built.
So what should he eliminate on the platform? And what are your ideas for revamping Twitter? What does Twitter become? I know some of the things he's talked about, an edit feature for tweets. I don't know if that, and he's also talked about letting people pay for the Twitter Blue authentication checkmark, also the algorithm, make it open source, put the code on GitHub. But where do you see it going? Like what content should be removed from Twitter?
So look, those are one-off ideas he had. I think those might be perfectly fine ideas. I think now we got to start with first principles and see what specific applications come out of that. One of the first principles, okay, to me, is if in doubt, let the user decide. Okay, let's say there are users who don't want to see unpleasant content. We want them to have a good user experience, don't you? What I would say is let them opt into Twitter's existing censorship machine. Twitter's existing censorship machine can exist for all those who wish their user experience to be not shown things. They can have that choice. But for everybody else, Twitter doesn't decide centrally to say that we're not going to show you something. The user gets to set their own settings themselves. I think that's a principle that can actually guide a lot of the applications he could build.
And then what do you make of the, you heard it from the White House, from the briefing room today, and even that ACLU mentioned it in its statement. While Elon Musk is an ACLU card-carrying member, we are concerned there's a lot of danger in having so much power in the hands of any one individual. And that Jen Psaki said that the president has long been concerned about the power of large social media platforms. Oh, you mean the one that censored the story about your crackhead son right before the election, which certainly helped you win? But this isn't what it's about. It might, the ownership might be in the hands of Elon Musk, and I didn't think he'd buy it because he would look too much like an autocrat. But the power is in the hands of every single person on that platform. They don't get it.
Exactly. By the way, you didn't hear any of that rhetoric when, say, Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post. So it's interesting how one-sided these responses are. But I think that that is a good principle to start with. Give the power back to the user, the power back to the people. And ultimately, if the user comes first, which is what Silicon Valley said all through the 1990s, it's still the mantra by which they live today, then let the users decide for themselves to say that, you know what, I do want to see content that I disagree with or that makes me feel unpleasant because that makes me stronger and gives me more fortitude. But if somebody else doesn't want that experience, then they shouldn't be forced to have that experience either. That, I think, is going to be something that's going to be very hard to argue with, whether you're on the left or the right. I also think it can be a North Star for answering some really thorny questions that Elon Musk is going to have to answer in the coming weeks.
One thing that I've said for months and months is that I think that the fudge you money, the screw you money, will ultimately lead us out of this censorship culture of, like, the left is right, meaning correct, and the right or conservatives are just wrong, and trying to shut down speech for a whole array of reasons. And what I mean is, I said Dave Chappelle and the likes of Joe Rogan, because they have enough money, they've got screw you money, that they can stand up and say, I'm going to say whatever I want, and if Netflix, you don't want to have me on your platform, if Spotify, you don't want to have me on your platform, I can leave. I can go somewhere else. And I think that Elon Musk is doing the same thing. I'll point to what Joe Rogan said just recently, that he gained 2 million subscribers after the cancel culture attempt. And so I think that I will throw Musk, he's a lot richer, but in the Dave Chappelle and the Joe Rogan category on this.
I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, Dagan, but that also raises the point that actually, why shouldn't every American have that privilege as well? To say that actually a lot of everyday Americans are forced to choose between speaking their minds freely and putting food on the dinner table. Well, here you have a class of people who don't have to worry about putting food on the dinner table and therefore are able to speak their minds. We're not a country that should just afford those rights to people who happen to have accumulated economic wealth. Part of what it means to be an American is that we don't force you to choose between the American dream and the First Amendment. You get to enjoy both of those things at once. And I hope the guys who are on the side of the debate with free speech that do have that level of wealth are able to not redistribute their wealth, but redistribute their actual opportunity to speak freely without consequence. That's the thing we need to redistribute back to every American.
And Elon Musk is doing that.
I hope so. It looks like he's about to do it, and I wish him well and would love to help in any way possible, as I think we all should.
And we would love to see that happen. Vivek, good to see you. Thank you so much, Vivek Ramaswamy. I got it right.